Okay, well, I hope you all are having a good Tuesday, that life's not too crazy. We're all staying safe and healthy. But today, Aaron will be talking about statistics and reporting with EnRoute. And he'll have that presentation for 20 minutes or so. And then we will open it up for a question and answer session. So you can go ahead and type any questions you have either about the reporting or any other questions you've had about EnRoute. Aaron knows it all. So you can go ahead and type any questions that you have in the chat window during the presentation or after he's finished, and we'll answer as many of those as we can. And we will be recording the webinar. So if you need to step out or you'd like to review it or share it with someone else after, we'll be recording it and we'll post it to our YouTube channel. And we'll send everyone a link and we'll email that out to you. And I think that's everything. So I'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, let's take a look at some reporting options in EnRoute. So there's some new things that have changed in terms of reporting and statistics in EnRoute 6.1. We also want to go over some of these same settings for older versions of EnRoute as well. One of the things that we've just changed recently is going to be the statistics menu, and where you can change those settings from version to version. So we'll kind of take a look at those, and then first of all, though, let's just look at all the places in EnRoute where we can kind of set some of these reporting options. And sometimes they're not as familiar as others, so we kind of want to just touch on each one of them and where you can find them. So depending on your process and where you're at, you'll know kind of where they are and whatnot. So first of all, I've got a little part here that I've created, and then I'm going to set up a new sheet with a bunch of copies here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make multiple copies so that when we do our statistics and things, we can kind of get a little more of a meaningful result, something with a little bit more work on it. So I'm just going to come in here and say, arrange my copies. I set them to my lower left is my expansion point. I put 0.25 inches here on each one, and then I just selected the horizontal by distance type 1 and vertical distance type 1 on both of these, and I just decided to do 2 rows and 2 columns. So when I hit apply, this will copy these for me. So now I've got a full plate of these, and I can now use this to kind of fill in some of my reporting options. So one of the places you're going to find the reporting options is going to be under your statistics. So anything you create on screen, any kind of drawing, any kind of tool pathing that you have is going to allow you to get statistics for this job. Now the statistics is the main screen in EnRoute where we would typically find this. And this is not anything new, but in a minute, we're actually going to find out how you can modify those values, because it does require a little bit of calibration. But in EnRoute 6.1, this is actually in a different location. So we'll kind of get that in a minute. So if I go to my machining menu, and it is important that you do have artwork with toolpathing applied. If you don't have any toolpaths, this won't really work. We go to machining, and then we select statistics. This is going to pull up a window, and actually you guys can't see it because it's on another screen, but it's going to pull up a little screen that asks you, what kind of program do you want to open this with? Typically, this file is actually an XML file. So if you don't have a default application already selected to open up XML files, for the first time, it's probably going to prompt you what program you want to use to open up these XML files. That's perfectly normal. That's just Windows trying to figure out how you want to open it. The best applications usually to open XML files are going to be Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Firefox, something like that. Typically, what we always recommend is Internet Explorer. So I'm going to choose Internet Explorer from my list, which obviously you can't see because it's on a different screen and I can't drag it over. But now when I select that option, it pulls up this right here. So this is going to be your job stats window. And again, I would recommend just opening that up with Internet Explorer if you can, because 100% of all of your Windows installs are going to have that application. And so it'll be a nice, easy, well-rounded solution to the XML format. So when I pull it in, we'll go full screen here so you guys can see it a little bit better. I get some information about the job that I'm running right now. It's going to give me the date and time, some information about this particular run. And we're going to actually come in here and modify these later on. So these will actually change. And then it's going to kind of give me some facts about my lines, my arc counts and moves and total tool changes and whatnot, just to kind of give me some statistics about, what the job is doing, different things like that. We can see how many tool lifts we're doing and whatnot. We can also see our feed distance in millimeters and inches. So this is feed rate inside of the material. Rapid distance would be how many inches it's flying across the table as it moves from position to position. And then our total distances in inches and millimeters. One of the things is another thing you'll see down here is kind of our time frame, and this is kind of where we really think that this is going to be the useful part. Not that the other part isn't useful, but this is going to be the time estimate where you guys can kind of get a quick idea of how long this is going to cut. So this is going to give us a tool change time. We'll adjust this later on down the road. Rapid time, feed time, and then it all gets added down here at the bottom. Now, if you guys run this on your machine, there are going to be possibly some instances where you might get an NA, which is not available. If you see that, it means that we have a couple settings missing that might cause an issue. Let me just illustrate that for a second. So let's go back to EnRoute. I'm going to go into my driver settings here. So I'm going to click on Setup and then Machine Setup. And I'm going to go to my driver speeds section. And I'm actually going to set these to 0 and then click OK. And I should see how my rapid time has NaN or not available. That's because my driver wasn't set up properly. And so basically what I'm seeing here is EnRoute wasn't able to calculate it based on the fact that it didn't have any data to input here. So another way that you might see is if you have under your feed time, if you forgot to put your feed rate in under your tool path and things like that, you'll probably get an inaccurate number or a not available setting. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to go ahead and set this back up again. And this is going to be important. And this is just kind of, I might as well just say this now, just to kind of give you an idea of what this window is for. This machine drivers window right here that we see under the driver speeds, these are not the feed rates that the software is going to use. We would always recommend that you apply feed rates inside of the tool path. Otherwise, you may run into circumstances where you're using a too small of a bit with a generic setting, and then you end up breaking something. So these are just values that we want to put in here that are generic, that will allow the machine to move so that you don't cause an accident. So for example, if I were to set my spindle speed to 0 here, and then I accidentally forget to apply a spindle speed in my routing offset, the potential could be that the machine would start to cut and plunge with no spindle speed, causing a massive problem on the machine side. So these are default values. So typically you want to be somewhat conservative with these, but not too conservative. So just something that you think would be, hey, if I had to put any tool in here, what would be the average that, or what would be a good feed rate for me to put in here? So this first section is speeds that are within the material. Again, these hardly ever get used because your tool path is going to take care of that. The second section is going to be the feed above the material. And this is going to be used in your output when you're moving rapid traversing across the material above the plate as it moving from part to part. So I'm going to go ahead and put just something in here. It could be somewhat fast because this is going to be moving above the material. So let's just say we'll put in, we'll just put in 300 and max of 500, and then plunge maybe of 20 and maximum of 180 or something like that. I would probably want to change this based on the scenario and whatnot that I'm using. You guys can kind of decide what this is good. These are just numbers I'm throwing out there. Don't write these down and put these in. This may be different for each machine. So just be aware I'm just throwing these numbers in here. These are not necessarily guidelines. So I'm going to hit OK, pull up my statistics again, and now my statistics are back to normal. So just know that if you do see that not available or NaN, that means that we've got a setting wrong somewhere. So I mentioned earlier that we need to calibrate this. This is important because the software, there's a lot of moving parts on your machine, and the software can't really account for all of that. And so this is where we're going to actually make some changes to the statistics to make sure it's calibrated for your machine. So I'm going to go ahead and close all these windows. And the way that we do this is we have a job like this, and then we're going to time it. So I don't know how long this job would take. Let's say it takes a half an hour, maybe an hour, however long that takes, we're going to make sure and time it. Make sure that you're aware of what your tool change times are and things like that. And we're going to go into our setup menu and we're going to adjust settings. So we're going to go to setup and we'll go to preferences. And this is new to EnRoute 6.1. This used to be able to be possible in EnRoute 6.0 and EnRoute 5, 5.1. It's just you had to go to a different place. And I'm going to actually show you where you do that in case you guys are running one of those older versions. But do be aware that if you're running any version of 6, you can upgrade to 6.1 and get these features. So if you have 6, you might want to go to 6.1 just to make your life a little bit easier, and you'll see why that is in a minute here. So we're going to go to the Cut Statistics tab, and this is essentially where we're going to modify those settings right here. So we've got two different types of estimators. We have the simplified, and then we have the standard. The standard simply adds our acceleration angle and deceleration angle. This you can make a guess at, or your machine would have these settings in here. So many machines have a value to where if the bit moves at an angle that's more than 45 degrees up in Z or down in Z, it changes the feed rate for your machine. So you may want to apply that in here, and this will give you a little bit more accurate times. If you don't have that option, then you probably just want to go with the simplified. We'll leave it on here for now just so that we can see it later in the report. Our cut factor is the next thing we want to talk about. This one is going to be the main thing that you adjust in terms of how you're adjusting for that time frame. I can set how long it takes me to do a tool change. So if your machine does it in 15 seconds, 20, 30, a minute, however long it takes, you want to put this in seconds. This is a value that's in seconds. So this is 15 seconds. We can change this. Let's go ahead and change it. And then I can set in my maximum feed. This is just a max feed for your machine. So it'll always max it out at that point. So the nice thing is here is that what I'm going to do is let's just say that this took, let's look at our statistics currently. So machining statistics, and it says it's going to take 0.42, so 45 minutes or 0.42 of an hour. So the next thing I could do is like, well, I timed it and it actually took longer than that, or maybe it took less than that. I'm going to now go into my preferences and my cut statistics, and I can adjust this up or down based on what my actual time was. So if I measured this and it actually went an hour and a half, then I would most likely want to increase my cut factor by a little bit and then rerun the statistics. The nice thing is that you can do all this right within EnRoute now. And so you can just click back and forth a couple times, and you can see now that it's increased our time. You say, well, it was a little bit more than that. So now I go back. Whoops, wrong screen. Go to preferences, cut statistics. Let's say go a little bit more, hit OK. Run that statistics again. Oh, that's perfect. You know, maybe this was just about right. And so now I'm good to go. Now that it's calculated, or that's turned on, or it's not turned on, but it's calibrated, now I can kind of get a much more effective time or cut statistics for this particular application. So that's how you're going to do it in EnRoute, the newest version of EnRoute 6, 6.1. And I'll show you guys what that latest version is. That's going to be EnRoute 6.1.0.15. So that's the cut statistics. Now, if you guys are running a little bit older, so an older version of 6 or an older version of 5, you're going to see the same menu under here. So you're going to see machining and then statistics. So if you have this option, now we're going to go back, and I'm going to pull up my file folder here. And this is where you're going to change that. So you're going to go to this PC. You're going to open up your local C drive. You're going to go to your EnRoute folder, whether it be 6.1 or 5.1. And you're going to find a file called EnRoute preferences.xml. EnRoute preferences, the only file called EnRoute preferences. You're going to right click on that, and you're going to open it with a program. I have Notepad++. You can open it with Notepad. You've got several applications there, and this is what it looks like right here. So this is going to be our file. Now I've already pulled this up, but let's do a search. Actually, let's just close it down, and I'll reopen it again. And let's just say we don't know where this is. Essentially, you're going to see this view here, and I'm going to hit Control F, do a find, and I'm just going to search for cut factor. Hit enter. I can then adjust my cut factor here, my tool change value, my max speed, and things like that. So I believe the decel angle and accel angle may not be in there for older versions of EnRoute, but the idea here is that if you have EnRoute 6.0 or 5.1, you would go into the EnRoute preferences.xml. Now, the important thing to know is that anytime you modify this EnRoute preferences.xml, you do have to close EnRoute. So this is where it becomes a little more tedious for you guys that are running older versions. So that's why I recommend if you have EnRoute 6.0, you upgrade to 6.1. It's a really easy install, and you can copy all of your preferences over without any issues. And if you guys who are running 5.1, hey, it's a great chance to upgrade to 6. But anyway, you can do it here. It's just a little more laborious because you do have to close down EnRoute, come in here, change the settings. If you make a change to the settings, to the cut factor, you hit the save button, close the file, reopen up EnRoute, run your statistics, see if it matches up, and then go from there. So it's a little more of a tedious process, but that's how you can do it in our older versions of EnRoute. We realized that a lot of people were using this, and we needed to make it a lot easier for people to access. And so that's why we went ahead and added it into our preferences option now, so that we can get it right here. And we don't have to sit there and try closing the software and reopening it again. So that's the statistics for cutting here in EnRoute. The one last place that I want to kind of show you guys where you can find some statistics is when you nest. You actually get a little bit of different information. So I'm going to switch over to another file. And essentially, it's the same piece. I just have one of them, and it's outside the plate. I'm going to go ahead and nest this real quick. I'm going to say, let's just do a quantity of 3. And I'm going to create a summary. So if you guys are using EnRoute to nest, if you click on this option that says Create Summary, This will give us a nice summary when it's done. So I'm going to hit apply. It's going to, oh, you know what? That's a fail right there. I forgot to group it. It's important before you nest, group. So I'm going to hit Control G. So even I forget sometimes. All right, so go back to our nest. We're going to do 4 copies, create summary, and that should be fine. Apply. There we go. That's looking much better. Okay, so now immediately after I create a nest, I can now either left click and hold and get my nest summary from here, or I can go to the transform menu, go to nest, and then click on view nest report. This is going to pull up a very similar type of file. It may ask you what kind of program to open it with. Again, use Internet Explorer as default, and then you get some more or very similar information. So now what it's going to do is going to tell you about the nested information. It's going to give you a picture of the parts and a picture of the sheet, kind of the nested area, and all this information here. So be aware that that is there. When you do nesting in EnRoute, you can get an additional set of information as well as your nesting report. So now if I actually go back up to here, and I'm going to delete this copy off so it doesn't mess that up, I can go to statistics and I can get this information as well. So I can get both of these informations in the same deal. So this is your nesting summary and statistics and things like that, and setting this up in EnRoute. We think it'll be helpful. It's much better now that you guys can get access to this without having to go to the XML file. So hopefully that'll make setting this up a little bit easier. Let's see if we got any questions here. Stuart, do we got anything? Looks like
we had a couple.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's see. It looks like running 5.1 don't have that button. Okay, so that's actually a good question. If you have a designer license, that button will not appear. Now, if you do have a pro license and you still don't see that button, that's actually a really good question. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shut down EnRoute, and we're going to hide this and hide this. And I'm actually just going to pull my EnRoute icon over to this so you can see it. All right, so here's my EnRoute 6 icon. If you run into that problem, sometimes this will happen. You can right-click on your icon for EnRoute and go to Properties, and it's going to pull up this little screen right here, and you may need to select Run as Administrator. This can be done every time. Now, this gets a little bit annoying, so you may or may not want to do it. Always set it to run, or the other way is you can just right-click and Run as Administrator. If you constantly are opening up EnRoute and you're having to, or let's say you run as administrator once, this is the problem about running as administrators. You probably are going to get this message if your user account control settings are way high. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and it'll just launch the program. So the bummer about that is you have to click that every time. But let's say that we open up the program and then we close it, and then the next time you open it up normally, well, and you still don't have the statistics. That's when you might want to go into your properties and tell it to always run as admin. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. Typically, EnRoute, for the most part, what happens is it kind of gets in a funk every once in a while, and it won't recognize that it has admin rights. It's especially bad for EnRoute 5. And so sometimes just running it once as admin will sometimes fix all the issues, and then it'll just go away, and then you'll never have that problem again. Or maybe you'll have it'll just come down later down the road or something. So sometimes you just have to run it once, and you're good to go. and it'll run normally. You can turn it on, off, and you're no problem. But if you are one of those users that for some reason, every time you open it, if you don't run it as admin, that window doesn't appear, that could be an issue just with the way that EnRoute is allowed to access your PC. So you may just need to come in here so that you don't have to right click on it every time. Come in here and just say always run it as admin, and then that should fix the problem. So hopefully that will fix it for you, Ken. It's one of those two things there. So
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So we had a couple other. Paul said, "Will you guys be running a webinar for editing the post?"
That's a good question. So currently, anything that the posts or any kind of driver setting are all done on our end here, mainly because the program that runs or creates the driver is not as easily editable by the user. So we use a programming language to do that, and we have source files. So unfortunately, the PST file that you actually see in the NDrivers folder is a byproduct of the actual original file. So if we go into our EnRoute 6.1 folder and we look at NDrivers, you'll notice that every driver typically will, or most drivers will have a CNF file, which is the configuration file, and then the PST, which is actually the driver file. This PST is created from a source code file that is not found in EnRoute. So, and you have to have this special program in order to be able to compile and create a driver. So at the moment, we don't have that option for users to be able to edit their own drivers. That may change in the future, who knows? But for now, they're not really user editable. But good question, though. If you do need something edited, as long as you have the latest version of EnRoute, at least at the moment, give us a call at our tech support, and we can take a look at what changes may or may be needed.
Okay. All right. And we've got another couple questions. Austin said, "Does that nesting summary only work if you make copies with the nest tool?"
This particular one, yes. So if I pull up EnRoute again, looks like I left it closed. So if we, that's too bad I closed that file. But yes, if we use this nester over here, if we use this nester here to nest, that's when this is the only time that report becomes available, is after we use the nesting with inside of EnRoute. There is a similar report that gets generated if you guys are using ATP, and you'll see that as well. So if we look at ATP and we go to right here, create printout of parts. So this will be similar. There'll be a little bit of differences though, just because usually we're dealing with lots of sheets and whatnot, but it's very similar to the nesting report. So unfortunately, that nesting report can't be really provided if we manually nest and make copies of the file. So if I sit here and I create a toolpath for this using any number of settings, and then I say make copies and I fill the plate, and then I go back to my nesting report, it just uses the last nesting report that it did. So that's only generated when you use the nesting tool in EnRoute. So.
Okay. And had a question from Bobby. He said that net summary does not give you a runtime, correct?
That should give you a runtime, correct? It should give you, as long as you calibrate it correctly, putting in all of your, making sure that you have feed rates in your tool paths, make sure that your setup menu, machine setup above material feed speeds are, things like that under the driver speeds. As long as everything in here is all settings are set correctly and things like that, you should get a fairly close estimate. And that's also one of the reasons why we say increase the cut factor under the settings, because sometimes when you time it, so the idea is you time the first job, you find out exactly how long it took for that entire job to cut from beginning to start. Then you go and adjust that same exact job under the settings, under the cut factor. And that the cut factor allows you to fudge the numbers just a little bit to kind of make up for anything that you might have problems with. So the idea here is that it's not going to be to the second, no, but it's going to give you a general time frame within 5 or 10 minutes, hopefully, of how long that job is going to take to cut after you start it. So that obviously that doesn't include load time and all that kind of stuff, but from the moment you hit start to the end and it's finished, that should be about the time. And that's kind of where that cut factor comes in, because you can adjust the cut factor a little bit, which will add a little bit of time, which may account for other things that the software or the machine does at the beginning of the job. So for example, if your machine does a bunch of initialization stuff at the beginning and you adjust your cut factor to include all of that, that can also be included. So there's not necessarily a setting for some of those things here, but that's what the kind of the cut factor is adjusted for, to kind of adjust the times to make sure that it's adding in for things that you may not necessarily have a setting for, to kind of fudge those around to kind of give you a better time frame of what you're looking at.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. So I think we're almost out of questions, but we do have one very important one here from Paul. He wants to know pancakes or waffles.
Waffles for sure, but
Good choice.
they have to be
Good man.
they have to be Belgian waffles though.
Ooh.
Yep, they have to be Belgian waffles. So waffles, but with a caveat.
All right. Specific variety. Okay, looks like we've got one more here from Daniel. He said, "How do you change where your stats page opens? Mine is opening in WordPad instead of Explorer."
That's a good question. So what's happened is somewhere in your operating system, there has been a default application set. Now, you can go through the, and I always hate to do it this way because it's a little bit, I don't know. I've always found that if I go to the control panel and I try and go search for default applications, Windows never really cooperates with me. It's always doing something silly. And so this is how I like to do it. So this is a little non-conventional, but I've found that it always works every single time. So if I right-click on my desktop and I say New, and then I'm just going to create a text document. And I can then grab this text document and I can change the ending of the file. So I'm just going to change it to a .xml. It's going to ask me, hey, do you want to do this? It might become unreadable. Yeah, just say yes. Just do it. All right, so now I have a file here that is an XML, and the icon will be different based on what application is set there by default. No big deal. We're going to right-click on it, and you're going to say Open With. Now, in this case, because it already has an application, it's not the first option. You might see it up here at the top. If you've never opened an XML file before, you might just see Open With. For you, Daniel, what you're probably going to see is you're going to see something like this. So you're going to need to go down here to Open With, and it's important that you go to Choose Another App. When you click on Choose Another App, this is the window that you're going to see right here. And it's going to say, what are the apps that you want to choose? By default, it says Internet Explorer, and then it's very important that you click this option. It says always use this app. And then if you need to click more apps, you can scroll through and find a different app. And then you can select Internet Explorer. And when I hit OK, that will update the default for that application. And now, after you do that, any new XML document will always get opened with Internet Explorer, regardless of what you do. The other way to do it, and which is a little more finicky. I've just never been able to get it to work 100%. Is you can go into the control panel somewhere. I forget where it's at, and you can set a default application for a certain type of file type. That's another place where you can find it. Again, I've always had a little bit of trouble with that just because Windows. So I like to do it this way. It kind of always 100% guarantees me that it's going to work.
Okay.
All right. You
All
guys had
right.
a lot of good questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming and for all your good questions there. Thank you, Aaron, for all the information. And we will be having our next EnRoute training. We'll still be doing these since these are ones we can do remotely. But our next EnRoute webinar, let's see here, is scheduled for April 21st. And we'll be talking about how to output a job larger than your table. So that'll be April 21st, same time. And we'll be sending out everyone an invite to that. And then we will also send an email with the link to today's recording. Just once again, want to say thank you to everyone, and we'll see you next month.